Hey everyone, Andrew, otherwise known as WinDeckTech here on YouTube, and yes, as the title suggests, I did buy a second Lenovo Legion Go. Now the reason being is because my wife stole my review unit given to me by Lenovo, and I do actually envy the large format handheld that it does provide. And clearly she does too, because I can't get it back from her. And that's why there's been a lack of content related to the Legion Go on the channel. So as such, I went out and bought my own, and now I can finally play with my own Legion Go. And going into 2025 with all the supposed rumors coming up of the Legion Go 2 announcement, is it a good buy in 2025 and onward? Let's find out. Now, very quickly, I want to address the fact that I did post a video previously when I received the Lenovo Legion Go given to me by Lenovo. They didn't give me any funds or financial incentive or anything like that, and they didn't even force me to say anything or give me any sort of like main talking points beyond just the specs and what it can do and how to use it. But with that being said, I did title that video as a review, and seeing as I didn't really pay anything and didn't give anything for the device and it was given to me, that is an obvious bias of me not being able to give an unbiased review of the product. Again, even though there was no financial incentive and I didn't say anything that was factually untrue or kind of coerced, I just want to address that, and that going forward on the channel, I will never again review something or label something as a review if I did in fact receive it for free or free with financial incentive. So going forward, I just wanted to address that before getting into the full review. So if you're asking yourself, why did I buy a second Lenovo Legion Go? Well, it's quite simple. I love the big screen. I think it's comfy when you do have proper grip accessories. I love the two USB-C ports, and that can't be understated enough because not enough handhelds have them. It really is a godsend, honestly. It does have a decent performance, and for what I need it for, I love the screen. It has a nice high refresh and a high resolution. No, it doesn't have VRR, but we'll kind of dive into that further, why I don't think that's terribly important depending on your situation. Now, getting to this device and why I actually love it, or not love it, but prefer it over a lot of other devices. It's large and in charge. I really love the big screen. The 8.8-inch screen is fantastic. No, it's not VRR, it's not perfect, it's not OLED, but it's a very good LCD screen. As such, though, being so large, it is uncomfortable, like I mentioned before, without any sort of grip or controller case or anything like that. Now, the buttons themselves, I find the face buttons kind of a little bit mushy at times. They're not amazing. I prefer the recent Xbox controllers. The sticks are Hall effects, so they're not going to be prone to stick drift or anything like that. Shoulder buttons are okay. They're not the clickiest, but they're decently clicky. Triggers, same thing. Like, they're not the tightest. I prefer a tighter trigger. I know that might be subjective. People think, well, it's true. Like, a lighter trigger, you're not going to be prone to fatigue if you're playing shooting games or something like that. But regardless, I do prefer a bit of a tighter trigger for when I'm playing racing games to be able to differentiate your braking and your acceleration. Regardless, it's fine. Like, there's no issues. I don't have any issues with that. The only issue I really have with the controls on this is the D-pad. The D-pad just sucks. There's no travel to it. It's a little bit clicky, but like, it doesn't have that rollability when you're trying to play a fighting game or something like that, or pulling off combo moves. It's decently accurate, but like, you're gonna know which one you're hitting. But again, there's just no travel there. It's just unsatisfying to use. Terrible, 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 honestly. It's the worst button on the device, personally. Now, getting to around back, the kickstand is an absolute godsend, and it should be on every single handheld in the market. Not to this extent, obviously, they won't be able to make a kickstand this robust for every device, but at least have some sort of kickstand. Hopefully a little bit better than a dinky one, but something so you can prop it up at times when you're doing downloads or something. Personally, my wife and I will use the kickstand as a bit of a lap support when we're playing on the couch, so you can just kind of rest it on your lap, take all of the weight off basically from the device, and just be playing as if there was a extended controller in your lap. With the 8.8-inch screen, you are still able to see everything like that too when you're playing with it not right up in front of your face, so it's a win-win. Now, the speakers do suck. They've always sucked. We know that. Personally, no amount of tuning that I've done or found or tweaks or anything like that have done anything worthwhile. They suck. They're always going to suck. Dialogue is hard to hear. You got to crank it up to like 50 to be able to hear anything reasonably at all, and then to 100 to be able to actually try to enjoy any sort of audio or content out of this. Now, getting to the back buttons, personally, I'm not a back paddle, back button kind of guy. Never have been. I just don't really care for it. I understand the purpose and do appreciate that, yes, it is better to use them than not when you're playing FPS games or racing games. I just prefer not to. I'm not that hardcore, don't really care. Anyway, they do get in the way a little bit. So if you see here, like your middle finger is going to be prone to hitting these quite often at times, especially if you're kind of like gripping, getting like in the moment, you know, you're kind of getting amped up and you're going to be hitting these buttons. Now, an issue that I did have, or my wife had with her device, keep in mind it was on beta software, but I tried every sort of tweak and fix and resetting and everything to fix it. And for whatever reason, when she was playing Dragon Age Veilguard, when she would hit the M2 button right here along the right side of the controller, because it acts as the zoom in button or aim button in the game, I believe it was, it would kick her out of the gamepad mode and put her into mouse mode and completely screw up her gameplay and get her killed. So I had to basically give her the 3D printed grips to prevent her from being able to hit that button. But again, it's just something that's just in the way, and I'm sure a lot of people don't use the FPS mode for what it's actually for, but we'll get into that a little bit later on. Now, as mentioned previously, they do have two USB-C ports. USB-C 4, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I do use eGPUs via USB4, Thunderbolt, whatever you want to call it. Technically on the AMD side, it is USB4. So anyway, doing USB4 with this, I've found connection issues with eGPUs, and especially if you have the plug plugged in and it doesn't really kind of register when it's at a certain angle. You have to have it facing a certain angle for it to get connected, and this happens on both this device, which is a Geek Squad, Best Buy, whatever, secondhand device that I bought off Facebook Marketplace, and it happens to my review unit from Lenovo as well. There's just no reason for it. That's probably something to do with voltages, temperatures, or something drawing too much power, or the connection not being there. For what it's worth, when I play on my MSI Claw and use the eGPU for it, there's no issues. I can wiggle it back and forth and tug at it, pull at it, and it will not disconnect at all. So it's related only to the Lenovo Legion Go, at least in my experience, and this has been corroborated by at least one other person that I've been in touch with that's been dealing with eGPU issues as well for their USB 4 on the Lenovo. And then, as mentioned previously, the M2 button issues. You know, you do have your FPS mode where you can disconnect the controllers and kind of play with the mouse, but again, I never used it, never did. I'm sure some people do. Not my cup of tea. I don't have a problem using the vertical mouse. I just have a problem with the lack of buttons that you have to control everything in a sensible manner. But I did actually forget about it, so much so that when I got the second Lenovo Legion Go and I was setting it up, I was like, oh, I need to go get a mouse to do some of the Windows setup stuff. I completely forgot that I had a mouse in my hand right here, so much so that I actually did go get the mouse, and then when I got back, I remembered that it had this feature. That's how little I care about it. Now, very quickly on the touchpad as well for the right side controller, it's nice, it's there, it's serviceable, but there's really no robust features to it like found on the Steam Deck. And personally, I don't really use it all that often because, again, the screen is 8.8 inches and it just serves to be a actual nice tablet form factor that you can pinpoint certain things when you're tapping them. Makes it a little bit easier when you're doing precise mouse movements with the touchpad, but 9 times out of 10, I just go for my finger and just tap on the screen. So anyway, it's 8.8 inch screen with 144 hertz. It's 1600p. Again, you're not going to be driving games at this full resolution because that's 2.5K, I think, technically on the scale, in 4K, 1080p, whatever. But anyway, so I do love the form factor. I love that you can turn it into a tablet. I love that you can do the tabletop mode. Personally, I don't do the tablet mode, but I'll do the tabletop mode, have a little mount for it, and just kind of lean back and play on my couch as well. That's a fun way to play with a controller connector and having this kind of like right in front of your face. It's pretty cool. Again, this is going to be a point of contention for two reasons. It's portrait based and there's no VRR. So being portrait based, playing older games or even certain recent games, you're not able to get a proper full screen, or it's not going to full screen properly. Windowed borderless sometimes isn't available in games, and you can't tweak it and fix it. As one recent example, God of War Ragnarok, for whatever reason, since the last update from the 780M drivers that I have installed on it, I now can't have it as full screen. I need to use lossless scaling going to get a true full screen. So lossless scaling is going to be a #1 app that you're going to have to use and learn how to use. It's not hard, it's simple, but to be able to correct some of these portrait-based display issues that you would get, as well, you do get a frame generation out of it that you're not able to use on the AMD side because of the portrait-based display. Now, it doesn't have VRR, so VRR is variable refresh rate, and typically a good VRR panel will be from 1 Hertz all the way up to its maximum, but typically you'll find it in the range of like 48 to 60, and what it'll be able to do is match the monitor's refresh rate to that of the FPS within that range. So an example of this is when you're watching a movie that's on a TV, traditional TV, and it's coming in at 60 Hertz, but movies are typically shot at 24 FPS, so that does not divide evenly or nicely into 60. If it was shot at 30, it would be smooth, but this is where you're going to notice with the kind of frame skipping or judder, especially in moving scenes, like panning shots in movies or whatever, you're going to notice that judder and kind of frame skip. Now, some TVs will have features to correct this, and that's where you're going to get that soap opera effect where it's all super smoothed out, and that's to combat the 24 FPS not being natively displayed and frame paced as if it was a game. Same idea. So you can combat that by playing at 48 FPS or running it at 48 Hertz or whatever, because that divides into 144 FPS, 144 Hertz evenly. So that's going to be frame paced nicely, and that's going to be the equivalent of running your game at 40 FPS on the 120 Hertz panel on the ROG Ally. So you're going to get that smooth frame delivery. Otherwise, you can run it at 30 FPS at 60 Hertz, and you will get the same sort of effect, obviously at a lower refresh and response time. But that is my suggested way to play it. So you don't need to worry about the VRR and doing all that. As long as you can get a consistent 48 FPS lock, you're golden. Now, the 1600p resolution as well, it's a bit contentious because people obviously aren't going to be able to run their AAA games with a mobile APU integrated graphics card, right? It's not even a card, it's a little chip die. So regardless, you're not going to be running the 2.5K resolution that this can do, but what you can do is run it at 800p, and then with conjunction lossless scaling, you're going to be able to either integer scale, or sometimes you'll be able to integer scale with the AMD drivers, but personally it's more consistent and easier with using lossless scaling. But anyway, that's going to scale up again nicely to 1600p, and it's going to divide into it evenly, and you're going to get a nice upscaled image without the cost of running FSR upscaling or TAA upscaling, DLSS type resolution upscalers, or frame generation. Now, again, with lossless scaling, you will be able to use frame generation through their driver-based stuff that they have, similar to fluid motion frames, but because this is a portrait-based display, you're not going to be able to use AMD fluid motion frames consistently, or honestly at all at times, because their drivers don't really support it fully, and they're only just starting to come out now. But honestly, it's a lot easier to use lossless scaling. So again, it's not a perfect screen, it's not OLED, it's LCD, but it's bright, it's colorful, it's pops, you know, it's just a nice screen to look at, despite its flaws of not having VRR and whatever. I would still say it's very serviceable, and the fact that my wife can play on it and not know what VRR is and have no complaints, I'm sure you will too. Now, naturally, going from the screen to the performance, it's kind of a natural connection. Again, we're not going to be running all of our games at 1600p. Typically, the sweet spot for me is the 800p with the integer scaling through lossless scaling. That's probably my preferred, and again, my suggested way to play for everybody that owns a Lenovo Legion Go. Now, performance, yes, we know it's the AMD Z1 Extreme. We know all of the performance numbers. Basically, at the end of the day, it's an ROG Ally. You're going to get the same or a little bit better performance from the ROG Ally due to the faster RAM timings at 7,500 megatransfers per second. Now, with the AMD 780M, we're going to be getting decent performance. You're probably going to be able to hit 30 to 60 FPS at minimum in most titles that you're going to want to play at either 1200p or 800p, and then upscaling to 1600p, whatever you're going to do. On a good day, you're going to be able to max out that 1600p on lighter titles, doing 144 hertz, full speed, everything, and it'll be amazing on the screen. So really cherish it when you can. Now, personally, as mentioned before, I don't really use the OEM drivers because they are just not as up to date, because they're lagging behind. They're not getting the same cadence that the official AMD 7840U drivers are getting. So I install the 780M graphics drivers, as many other people do. But this also allows me to use an eGPU through the USB4 port, because you can't do it with the traditional Z1 Extreme drivers. So personally, I don't know, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Yes, it's technically an advanced maneuver, if you will, to install it, but at the end of the day, it's probably more user-friendly because of the automated update nature that you're just getting through AMD software suite itself. Now, if we're talking about competitiveness versus the 890M, the recently released chip on the AI HX 370, whatever you want to call it, either way, it's the successor to in the very top end. In early numbers on certain devices, it's very limited right now, but we should be seeing more handhelds very shortly, hopefully coming from various manufacturers. But it's very close. It's not game-changingly different. Yes, you're going to get a decent performance boost, but it's not going to be game-changingly different that you're going to be missing out on titles this year, I would say. If it's going to be running on the new Z2 Extreme chips or the HX 370 chips, you'll probably be able to run it still decently at 30 FPS or whatever, as you would through upscaling and everything on the Lenovo Legion Go and Z1 Extreme chips. Now, where this does lag behind, though, is with the 16 gigabytes of RAM, and this is going to be an increasing issue, especially as newer games come out, and like the Indiana Jones Great Circle title, that one is a requirement for hardware ray tracing, not software, hardware ray tracing. So you need RTX 2000 card and up to do that. So you can do ray tracing, hardware ray tracing, because it has the RT cores and everything built into it with these iGPUs, but it's going to be taxing, and it does take a lot of VRAM to do. So as we've already seen in, again in Indiana Jones, you're going to be limited by that 8 gigabytes of VRAM that you're going to be able to reasonably allot to it, because you're seeing the 8 gigabyte desktop cards actually struggling to get decent performance and losing out on performance because they don't have enough VRAM. So if you are somebody that's kind of paranoid or going to be playing games at crank settings, or hopefully trying to get closer to the native like 1080p screen like on the ROG Ally X, then yes, it is potentially worthwhile to get that system RAM upgrade, but at the cost that you're going to be paying right now versus like the Gen 1 devices with 16 gigabytes of RAM on the used market, I just don't think it's really worth it there just yet. If you're wanting the ROG Ally X though with more RAM, I would suggest for these new handhelds to come out, people are going to be offloading the ROG Ally X, same as they did with the original, and you're going to be able to get a lot more of them a lot quicker, a lot more reasonably, and the price will be hopefully driven down on the used market. Currently, they're a little bit scarce, but in Canada, I found one for like $700 used, which is really good because they're $1,200 out the door where I am. So I don't have any footage recorded of it or anything like that, but the reason for me actually wanting to get the actual physically separate Lenovo Legion Go device separate from my wife's is because I wanted to run Bazzite on it to try and do a dedicated SteamOS kind of like build or whatever with it. But as we all know, SteamOS is probably going to be coming to handhelds very soon and PCs very soon because Valve's been doing a lot of work behind the scenes. So that should be coming officially very shortly. But the Lenovo Legion Go running Bazzite, it is supported by the Bazzite development team, if you will, in the sense that they've done all the tweaks that they can, but there was still just stuff that was a little bit buggy at times that wasn't working perfectly, especially because they did like 1200p, I think, is their set resolution, but I wanted to maybe sometimes crank it up, so I had to, just little things like that that were probably going to be fleshed out entirely in proper SteamOS for other handhelds like the ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion Go and whatever else we see from the future handheld makers. But the level of tweaking, it's not annoying, I can do it, it's there, it's super user friendly, it just got tedious and I was like, why am I going to do this? And I was planning on doing 100% Bazzite. I didn't install Windows at all. I did all the firmware updates via Bazzite, but ultimately what broke it for me was not getting vibration to work even after doing all the firmware updates, controller updates, and all that stuff. So I installed a 2 terabyte card and just kind of said screw it, I'm doing 100% Windows, and that was also because of the eGPU use that I do for this handheld specifically. If I wasn't using an eGPU, I would still probably be going back to Bazzite or at least doing dual boot. So in the future, I will be doing a dedicated video in relation to Bazzite and running it on the Lenovo Legion Go full-time. But personally, I know some people do have issues sometimes with the eGPU, but what I found works with Bazzite, at least in the past, and it did work with the Lenovo Legion Go when I had it installed, was that you have to go to desktop mode first, plug in the GPU, do all the setup. It's probably going to ask you for your passwords and all that stuff to do a keyring management stuff that it does within the desktop environment. And then once you have that all set up, you will reboot the device without it plugged in, and then you should be able to plug it in when you're into the SteamOS environment big picture mode and be able to use it like that. The only issues I've come across is that if you're doing a cold boot or a fresh from power off state to power on, and you have the eGPU plugged in when you're doing that power on state, it would just hang there. It will not do anything. Even if you have it plugged into an external monitor, if you have it plugged into the device and displaying directly through the device itself, it'll just hang there. You unplug it, you reboot it, it'll do like a maybe 30-second boot to like kind of retrain memory and everything, and then it'll boot right in. I tried playing with secure boot settings and everything, and nothing I did kind of fixed it, but reliably, once you did that kind of initial desktop setup, I was able to get it to reliably work in big picture mode. So that's kind of my experience. If you're looking to use this with Bazzite with eGPUs, technically they say that they do support eGPUs with Bazzite, but it's very finicky, as all eGPUs are anyway. Now, getting towards the end of the video and probably the most watched or skipped to part, the likes and dislikes. Now, these are going to be mostly subjective. Some will be objective, but mostly it's going to be personal preference, and you're going to take from that what you will, but hopefully it should be kind of a broad general user appreciation and kind of nitpicks with the device. So getting into the first set of likes and dislikes, I try to balance them out 1-to-1. It will be the screen size. So the screen size, the 8.8 inch, I've already gone over it. Love it. Huge. Amazing. Great. Portrait based, my dislike. The lack of VRR, it doesn't really get to me. It's the portrait base that gets to me. It's just always in the way, always a problem in the games that I play. Some people may never notice it, and you know what, good for you in the games that you play. But a lot of people do, and a lot of people are more kind of being brought to the attention or awareness of it without even knowing what exactly it is at times. They just know that, hey, this isn't appearing straight, this isn't working right like a normal desktop that they might have been used to. That this is a plus and advantage to the ROG Ally and ROG Ally X in the sense that it just works in that way of like a laptop or desktop. Now, this is also partially due to Windows, but they've gotten a little bit better with it. But again, you can't fix old games or games that just don't account for it. If you do want to fix this though, lossless scaling, you're going to have to get it. It's a cheap app. Get it. You'll immediately change everything about the Lenovo Legion Go and its portrait-based display. Shame that you have to do it, but it's a great tool and a great app to have. Now, going to the triggers and sticks and the shoulders, I love them. They're great. The trigger, stick, shoulders, I personally think that they're really good for a controller. The sticks and the triggers personally could be a little bit tighter for my preference, but I do see why that they would go for a little bit kind of a looser, more traditional feeling stick, because people would probably complain about it being fatiguing to use at time. And I do understand that playing certain games with the tighter triggers is getting fatiguing and annoying. So I can appreciate that. Now, the dislike for that though would be the D-pad. Again, I already kind of ranted about it. I hate it. It's terrible. There's no travel. It sucks. So 2 USB-C ports, great, awesome. Dislike for that though, eGPU USB4 support is iffy. Again, I was having disconnection issues with eGPUs if it was still plugged in, but being tilted ever so slightly for it to crash. And I'll show footage of that happening too. Now, trackpad, yes, it's great. It's nice to use, but again, I don't really use it all that often. I only ever use it for fine motor control kind of things, or if I'm in game doing like again, just a fine click thing in the settings or something like that. Dislike for that would be the lack of robust features to it that we would find on the Steam Deck. Again, those are top tier. Lenovo Legion is just it works. It's good for what it is. It's nothing spectacular. It just works, I guess. Now, software, I didn't really talk too much because people already know like of the recent updates of the Legion space and everything and its kind of overhaul. But again, it's a lot better than it was at launch in my initial videos and everything. They completely overhauled it, changed it. It's snappier now. Some of the more recent updates kind of tweaked it and it's felt a little bit less responsive and brought in certain bugs, but it's getting there, and hopefully by the time their next device comes out, whatever it might be, it's just like top tier when they have it out, hopefully. But that remains to be seen. Given their track record though, I would say Asus and their Armory Crate, it's top tier. Legion Space is like kind of B- tier at best. Now, in tandem with that though, it's not directly Lenovo's fault for this, but the Z1 Extreme drivers or lack thereof, because they have to be dealt through Lenovo and the manufacturers of the devices. They're going to be off cadence from each other even, so the ROG Ally is running separate Z1 drivers than the Lenovo Legion Go, so there might be game support on one and lack of game support on another, so that's why I do personally run the 780M drivers, and why a lot of people actually do as well, just for that okay it works kind of mentality, and realistically the way it should have been from OEM, i.e. from AMD. They shouldn't have left the drivers to be put onto the manufacturers, because they already have so many things that they deal with, and maintaining driver support for a GPU at that level, like, it's just not on their kind of product stack and what they do. They're very much like, okay, next device, and maintain the kind of basics, but they're not going to be putting a whole bunch of money and effort and time into doing that. And that's why we see the like 3, 4, 5, 6 months gaps of not seeing a driver update on certain devices, whereas the AMD official 784U drivers do get them all the time, like monthly or however AMD officially releases them. Sorry for the rant, but it's just an issue that really drives me insane. Now, moving over to some more positives, the kickstand. Kickstand, again, it's a god tier on this. It's robust, it's sturdy, it's useful in any situation that I've found. I have no complaints about it whatsoever. On the flip side, there's painful ergonomics without the grips. So you're getting the palm grip scenario, getting that sharp pain on the inside of your palms when you're playing with it for a long time, and it's heavier than the ROG Ally and things like that, so you're going to be feeling that fatigue a lot sooner. But on the plus side, the kickstand, you can use it as a little lap pillow kind of stand and kind of rest a lot of the weight on your lap, which is what my wife and I do a lot. Bonus tip, if you do have like a little couch pillow, put that on top of your lap, then rest the device on that with the kickstand, and then your shoulders at your side, and you're game and happy. Now, tablet mode, it's a plus. I don't ever really use it, but it is a plus. It's a positive, and that's personally probably why the device has retained so much value. Secondhand market ROG Allies, I can find them for maybe $300 to $350 on the cheapest end for the Canadian market. Typically maybe around $400 to $500, but you can get them used again for Geek Squad and anywhere. You can get them relatively cheap. The Lenovo Legion Go, though, has retained its pricing and hasn't seen as steep sale cuts as the original ROG Ally has. So that's also got to play into the fact that they did release a successor or mid-gen refresh with the ROG Ally X, so that drives the pricing down of the previous product, obviously, but still, we haven't really seen that kind of natural, steeper decrease in used market pricing. Obviously, when the next generations of handhelds come out, the Z2 chips and everything from all the manufacturers, the Lenovo Legion Go will get cheaper, I'm sure, but the tablet mode is likely why people are kind of accepting this device. It's got a bigger screen, it's a little bit more kind of jack of all trades, master of none really, but just it's useful in a lot of scenarios. Use it on an airplane to watch movies, you get a really good screen versus the stupid screen that they have in the seats. It's amazing, right? Like a nice 8.8 inch screen. Again, enough can't be said about this screen. Now, going to the speakers, they suck, they're terrible. Use headphones if you really value any sort of decent audio quality. Tabletop mode plus the connector with the third-party thing, it's nice. I use like a little kind of gooseneck stand thing to hold the tablet form and then play with a connector when I'm sitting on the couch, so that's a really comfortable way to play. The non-standard SSD size, I kind of actually forgot about since my original review, because when I went to go upgrade with the 2TB NVMe drive, it was the shortest version that you find, the 2230 that you find in the ROG Ally, but the Lenovo Legion Go is just a smidge taller. So I was able to do it without getting any sort of adapter mods. I just basically put some thermal pads to hold it down and it's good. There's no screw holding it down, but I'm not worried. I've had no issues. It does get a little bit warm, but that's probably to the fact that I have actual thermal pads sitting on both sides now, and it's making more contact with the back end of the device. But hopefully in the future, we're going to see full 2280 drives in all devices, because if they can do it in the ROG Ally X, I think they can do it in just about anything nowadays. Now, finally, for screen related stuff, I love the integer scaling from 800p to 1600p. It's great, but the lack of VRR, it does have to be said, as this is objective, because objectively it does make for a better device and a better viewing gaming experience. If you're wondering why, you can go back to where I was referencing movies and the judder at 24 FPS on a standard 60Hz screen, and that's why you get that kind of like skipping almost during panning shots in movies, and why there is features from a lot of TV manufacturers manufacturers, if not every single TV manufacturer, called action smoothing or motion smoothing, and that's when you get that soap opera effect of like super hyper, like almost like unrealistic looking motion, right? What you would find on a soap opera, because that's how they were made, right? So that's how I can kind of reference it to something that a lot of people might be able to notice a lot easier, or have kind of a frame of mind reference to be able to say, yes, okay, I understand that and understand why VRR is important. Because I think a lot of times people say, yes, it has VRR, VRR is good, but they don't really give any sort of context beyond that as to why it's good, what works, and what it's actually doing, and any sort of comparison as to what you could directly correlate it to. And in the rudimentary sense, that's what I can kind of relate it to, just because of the frame pacing being off. Getting towards the outro of this video and just kind of summing everything up, is it worth a buy in 2025 and onward? I would say personally, yes, if you can get one for a nice kind of used discount price. It's still going to be mostly performant comparing to the 890M, which will be hopefully found in the Z2 Extreme chips and all that stuff. But the only real kind of drawback is the 16 gigabytes of RAM. You shouldn't have issues in a lot of games, especially if you just run things low. It's a small enough screen that it's not going to look that bad. But if you're playing newer games like Indiana Jones or something like that, that require the ray tracing and that requires extra VRAM, and if you're trying to use frame generation and upscaling, which also eats into VRAM, 16 gigabytes is not enough to divide between VRAM and system RAM, especially with games now requiring 16 gigabytes of RAM. So it will prove to be an issue, but it's not going to be a complete 100% issue, I think, for handheld games that you're going to be expecting to play reasonably on a handheld on the go. Yes, there's going to be more and more games coming out that will not be supported or not run amazingly at launch, or if at all, but it'll still be performant through 2025 until a potential Z3 Extreme or 990M GPU, whatever they go with in the next generation. So if you do have one, I would say don't worry, don't upgrade it right away. Wait to see what the numbers are doing, wait to see what the devices are. If the devices are that much of a better upgrade for you personally, if the battery life is better, if there's more RAM and you do value things like that and the price is right, then go for it. I suggest you try to sell your current one that you have secondhand, and then go and get the new one with the cash that you got from that. And then on the flip side, if you don't have one and you don't really want to spend a lot of money because you just want like a cool little handheld to play games on the couch at home or something like that, you're not even like a big traveler, just like lazy games, cool, whatever, I would say, again, just go for a second hand or even Geek Squad. Wait for the second generations of handhelds to come out, the true second generations, not the Ally X, and then even further prices will be brought down. Finally, versus like the 1X Mini X1 and all that stuff, they're kind of Lenovo Legion Go, big format type handhelds. Yes, they are attractive. I would only get those though if you do have Oculink and use Oculink. Other than that, I wouldn't really kind of go for them at this point because they're usually not cost competitive in a lot of regions. If you're in a region that does have them and it's more cost effective for you to get those, 100%, they're nice devices. Just here, I couldn't really justify getting something that I just realistically want for like a big screen playing on the couch. But that's just something to keep in mind and for potential buyers. Now, closing everything off, more on a personal note, thank you for everyone that's kind of stuck with this channel. My kind of personal little New Year's resolution to this leading into like December and then in January fully was that I'm going to spend more time with the channel, and that's going to be more personal touches. And obviously that is a big personal touch like this of showing off my face and doing kind of a face video for the first time. So following this video, there will be an actual sponsored video from OBSBOT, the provider of the webcam that you see here. So if you're interested, actually, I guess for the first time in my life, and because I'm going to start putting a lot more care and attitude into the channel, get liked and subscribed if you want to see more content. And as always, I hope you all have a great day.